Welcome back. In our last video, we went ahead and made this main character for our open screen, and we also made the slime, our slime roof. And in this one, what we're going to do is we're going to add some type. We're also going to do a little animation. So let's first set up our composition by adding some type. And again, the name of our game is called Sanitize. So we're going to go ahead and use the Hype type tool. And you can go right up here to the toolbar and get the text tool. And it goes ahead and makes a text box that says new text in it, so it has a default for you. It comes in black, so what we're going to want to do is change that color so we can work with it a little easier. So if you see, I'll go over here to the typography in the inspector bar, and I'll click on the color. It brings up a color wheel again. Take it all the way to the other side, and there's our hex value for white again. And we're going to go ahead and keep it on white for now. We'll come right back over to the element in a second. So just like in any Mac layout app or art app, you have handles that you can stretch around called a bounding box on the element itself. So no different here in Hype. And that's another reason I love this application, is because it feels so intuitive to everything else I've learned over the years working with art on a Mac. So now I'm going to go into the new text. I click next to it. I can drag through it to select it, or I can double click it, triple click it, and it'll select it all. But I'll go ahead and do that. We're going to go ahead and create the word sanitize. Whoops. And whoops, sanities. So we'll go ahead, get the word set up. We're going to come back over to our element or inspector bar into typography, and you can go ahead and do alignment, simple alignment, just like you do in all the other applications. Here we're going to go ahead and center that by clicking there. You can also do right. You can justify it, but we're going to go ahead and keep it centered. Also, the other nice thing is Hype comes with some standard fonts loaded that are really nice, so you can get all kinds of different fonts, and you can see how it changes. You can also increase the size, which we're going to do anyway. Let's bring it right there. Show you how the fonts you can change the fonts and get some different styles, and it looks pretty cool. The thing that I really like in Hype Pro 3.5, and I believe they did this in an earlier version, was that you can also bring in more fonts. So you can access the Google Fonts library, and you can take a look at all the different fonts that they have. So you can add hundreds and hundreds of fonts to your project and pick one that you really like. It'll load it into the application that you're creating. So let me go ahead. I'm going to pick one right now. I kind of like that just for now. We'll go ahead and add it, and you can see that in here it'll add that into the font library. So let's go down and find it. Luckiest Guy. There it is. Luckiest Guy. And that's kind of a neat looking font. We'll go ahead. Let's bring it up to 64. You can see what happens. If the bounding box is too small, it'll do an auto wrap, and it'll wrap the word. So here we're going to just bring it out a little bit further. Sanitize. And now what we can do is go in and let's make the color change again. Using our wheel, you can go through, pick any color that you want. We're going to go ahead and pick a purple color, and there we have our typeset. Now you can do some other things too, which is neat. If you have it against a background, let's say that you can see a shadow, you can go ahead and add a text shadow, which is kind of cool. And just by hitting on the X and Y axis buttons, you can see it gives a nice drop shadow. You can then blur it out so that you have a nice effect, just like we did on our highlights. You can change the colors again, do some neat things like this one we can make green. And here you can see, which is neat, against the black with that nice green glow, we have a toxic looking bit of type there, so that's kind of fun. So we're going to go ahead and keep that. Letter spacing you can adjust again by dragging to tighten it or open it up a little bit. Word spacing, if you have multiple words, it'll do the same. And line height will give you more space letting between the lines of type if you have multiple lines of type. The other thing I want to go over on the type real quick is the more fonts. If you also look, you can do a custom CSS if you're a web developer, and you can add your own CSS cascading style sheets to the type, and that's really neat and embedded in the head of the HTML. That's really helpful if you're doing something very custom. The other nice thing too is you have the Monotype Fonts library, which is another nice library online, and you can see you can add all those different fonts same way you did with the Google Fonts. So there you go. All right, so now let's take a quick preview like we always do. Let's bring it over here into the window. You can see what we have now is we have our sanitize. Okay, so we now have our screen with our nice type there. Before we close out this video, I want to go ahead and we're going to do a little animation. If you are a seasoned type user, you might want to skip this because you probably already know how to do the animation, but if not, go ahead and stick around. What I want to do first is I like this slime up here, and you remember what we did in the last one, the last video, we went ahead and grouped it, but we didn't group the highlights. So what we want to do is go ahead, we're going to take our arrow, drag all the way around everything, and we're going to group the first group with the highlights. So now everything is there. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a real simple animation where we're going to have this roll in to the frame. So we're going to drag the slime block all the way up here above the pasteboard. If you take another preview, you'll see it's gone now. What we want to do now though is we're going to select this, and if you see where it says group, remember how I told you earlier it's always good to name things. We're going to name this and call it slime group, so that if we do any edits down the road, it'll be easier to find out that piece and make the changes. Now what we can do is if you take a look down here on the properties, this is a timeline, and a timeline in animation allows you to do frame by frame by frame changes, and that's how animation works. The eye perceives each small movement when put together at a certain speed as a fluid movement. So the more frames you have, the more fluid you can be. You also have some tricks that I'll show you here where they have an ease in, ease out, some animation terms that allow you to speed up the beginning, slow down the end, or speed up the end, or bounce it. Real fun things. But we're going to do our first bit of animation here by selecting slime group, and we want to bring it down from the top and into the frame. So if you go down here, you'll see the properties. These are the things you can animate on an element. You can make an element appear and disappear with opacity. You can make it move from left to right. You can move from top to bottom. You can do the size change and the width change. And if you click on this little down arrow, you can see Hype gave you a ton of things that you can animate. And this allows you so much creativity over your elements, be they placed pictures, type, or elements you draw in Hype. You can do so much with the animation and come up with a really nice presentation. But this one's going to be our first one, and it's going to bring it down from the top. So we're going to take that slime block, we're going to go ahead here, and we're going to place a keyframe. What that keyframe says is this is the starting position of the block, of the slime block. Then we're going to bring it in on 1 second, and you can see it gives you the time here. You can change the time also by typing in a number. So if you wanted 1/22, 1.20, you can do that, or whatever you want to do. This is also good to get real good precision, so I'm bringing it in here for 1 second. And then I'm also going to enlarge this, so you can see this is something that was new in Hype Pro. I love this feature. It allows you to enlarge the keyframe so that you can see things a little better. So I'm going to bring it up here so you can actually see each little tick that we have. Now, in traditional animation, you would have had to put a keyframe here, then put a keyframe there, and move it by hand. Nice thing about Hype, you go ahead, you just put another keyframe there, which is your end frame. We add a plus, so you can see right there, shows you from 0 to 1 second. And now watch this. As I drag it down, it fills in all that space. So what it's doing, and if you take a look at this, it's animating that for you. That's pretty cool. One other thing is Sanitize would be in there before our slime came down. That's not cool. We want to make this a little more exciting. So we're going to do a couple more animations. I'm going to go ahead and take our eyeball animation, And at the same time, I'm going to go back to the 0, and we're going to take him, move him off the screen and over to the side a little bit. And again, just to repeat how this works, we're going to go ahead and do an origin top, and then right at 1 second, an origin top. And this time though, we're going to move up and right about there. Okay, so there he is. So if you take a look at this, if you run this scrub, this is called scrubbing, take it all the way back, boom, there he comes in, and there you have a nice little animation of two characters. Again, Sanitize is still there before everything. Why don't we go ahead and make this fade in from black? So we're going to go all the way back to 0 again, and on this one we select the word Sanitize and we come down to the opacity. We're going to click on 0, and that's going to give our first keyframe, like we said, our starting position. This time though, we're not going to go all the way to 1 second. We're going to go to about half, so about 0.15 seconds. We're going to add another keyframe. Now what this does, we're going to now move over to our inspector bar, and I'm going to show you what happens here. If you select that first keyframe and we come to the inspector bar, we're going to go to our opacity, and that's under the elements. So even though it's a type element, the opacity works on the overall element, not the type itself. So here's what we're going to do. You can see that the opacity is at 100%. What we want to do is take that down to 0. Okay, so that it's disappeared at the very beginning when you open your screen. And at the end, at 0.15 seconds, it comes in, but it doesn't come in that fast. You can see it fades in. All right. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the animation. There's so much more to the animation, and I hope to have more tutorials on how to use keyframes and do some really cool things in the future. But let's go ahead and take one more preview before we end. And there it is. Isn't that cool? You can go ahead, and there you have a nice animated opening screen. Can't wait to see you in the next video.